Welcome to RTV Global Network. I'm Marcus.
And I'm Alina.
And it is Thursday, 06/08/2026. And, right now, as you're listening to this, there are 108 billion rupees just sitting in a locked bureaucratic vault.
Yeah, it's honestly staggering to even visualize that amount of money just sitting there.
Right. I mean, that is enough capital to basically rebuild an entire nation's climate-destroyed road network or, fund a dozen hospitals or even completely revolutionize a national tech grid. But it is entirely trapped. It's just paralyzed by administrative friction and legal loopholes.
Exactly.
And if you are joining us today, you already know that making sense of the daily news cycle requires way more than just reading the headlines. We have a massive stack of sources in front of us today, covering everything from intensifying local monsoons and really high-stakes political audits, all the way to a SpaceX rocket crashing into the lunar surface and a world #1 sporting triumph.
It's a huge mix today.
It really is. And our mission in this deep dive is to stop treating these events like isolated, random data points. Okay, let's unpack this.
What's fascinating here is that that really is the crucial starting point. If you look at a localized landslide and then a massive tax backlog and then a shift in global artificial intelligence as separate stories, you are completely missing the underlying architecture, how the world actually functions.
Right, they aren't happening in a vacuum.
Exactly. Our goal today is to examine these events as a series of systemic stress tests. The climate is currently stress testing our physical infrastructure. Bureaucratic gridlock is stress testing our financial institutions. And the rapid acceleration of technology is stress testing our global regulatory frameworks. By finding the hidden connections between these seemingly completely disparate events, we move from simply consuming information to actually understanding the mechanics of the systems we all live in.
Yeah, and let's start with the most immediate physical stress test happening right at our doorstep. Because the climate crisis is no longer just this, theoretical debate for the future. It is literally washing away the ground beneath our feet.
Yeah, quite literally.
Right, so in Sri Lanka, the southwest monsoon has intensified to a really severe degree. We are looking at torrential rain, incredibly aggressive wind patterns, and a major landslide that has just completely severed the Nalathanias-Freepata road.
Which is a huge deal.
Huge. I mean, when an economic and transit artery like that is blocked, the ripple effects are immediate. You can't get goods through, people can't move. The Ministry of Defense has actually had to step in, placing Triforce's teams on high alert and standby in the Kandy and Nuwara Eliya districts.
Wow.
Yeah, and they are coordinating directly with the Disaster Management Center, the DMC, to handle the fallout. And what's interesting is this local mobilization is mirrored by international financial movement.
Oh, right, the ADB funds.
Exactly. The Asian Development Bank, the ADB, just approved a USD 200 million emergency assistance package for Sri Lanka, specifically for post-cyclone Dewa recovery. And furthermore, tracking the live dengue crisis, we see India has just gifted 500 liters of technical malathion to support domestic mosquito control efforts.
When you lay all those elements out on the table, it paints a very stark picture of a region operating in what feels like a permanent state of ecological triage.
Yeah, triage is the word.
I mean, you have the military stepping in for civilian disaster release, a massive multinational bank wiring hundreds of millions of dollars just to return things to a baseline, and a neighboring geopolitical heavyweight shipping chemical supplies across the strait just to manage a biological outbreak.
It's intense.
It really highlights the sheer fragility of the existing infrastructure.
But let me stop you there, because the word triage implies a temporary state of emergency before the patient is healed, right? I look at this and I don't see temporary triage. I see a chronic, systemic failure that we are just constantly throwing Band-Aids at.
Right. Treating the symptoms.
Exactly. A landslide blocks a road. We deploy the military to clear the mud. Dengue cases spike because of the stagnant water. We spray the malathion that India sent us. But are we actually addressing the underlying vulnerability?
That's the $1 million, or rather, $200 million question.
Right. So with the ADB injecting this $200 million lifeline for recovery, is there a massive risk that we just use those funds to rebuild the exact same vulnerable roads, using the exact same outdated engineering in the exact same vulnerable valleys, rather than fundamentally climate-proofing them?
What's fascinating here is how international funding mechanisms actively, albeit unintentionally, disincentivize long-term resilience.
Wait, how do they disincentivize it?
Well, you have to understand the mechanics of an emergency assistance package.
Yeah.
The ADB is releasing this $200 million quickly because it is categorized as emergency relief following Cyclone Didwa. When a road washes away, the immediate political and economic pressure on the local government is immense.
Sure, people need to get to work.
Right? Goods cannot flow, people cannot get to hospitals, local commerce just dies. So the mandate is to get traffic moving again as cheaply and as quickly as possible. If you decide to climate-proof that road, Joy, which means rerouting it, building massive subterranean drainage systems, and using specialized materials.
That's going to take years.
Exactly. It might cost 4 times as much and take 3 years to complete. The emergency funds often do not cover that kind of capital-intensive long-term development. So the system incentivizes a quick fix. And the tragedy of that mathematics is that you are virtually guaranteed to be asking the ADB for another $200 million in 5 years when the next monsoon washes away the quick fix.
Wow. It is literally a cycle of dependency fueled by the urgency of the moment. And speaking of dependency, I want to look at the Deng cracker in India's specific donation of 500 liters of technical malothion. You hear the term disaster diplomacy thrown around when these exchanges happen, but isn't this just another form of client-state dependency?
It definitely looks that way on the surface.
I mean, why are we relying on a neighboring country to send us the bug spray required to manage our own public health crises?
It is a valid critique, but we have to look at the geopolitical leverage of soft power here. Disaster diplomacy isn't just about altruism, right? It is a highly calculated foreign policy tool.
Oh, for sure.
Environmental and biological challenges do not respect national borders. A mosquito-carrying dengue doesn't recognize the maritime boundary in the Pak Strait. By stepping in with technical chemical support, India achieves multiple objectives simultaneously.
Like what?
Well, yes, it creates a layer of reliance, but it also weaves the two nations closer together on a very fundamental ground-level basis. It forces the two health ministries to communicate, it synchronizes logistical supply chains, and it builds immense goodwill with the general population.
Right.
In a region where geopolitical influence is highly contested, donating 500 liters of malothion is a relatively cheap but incredibly effective way to secure your diplomatic footprint.
Which brings us back to the core issue. The ADB's $200 million is an absolute necessity, and the Indian malothion will save lives, but both highlight a glaring domestic vulnerability. I mean, Sri Lanka wouldn't be nearly as reliant on foreign emergency aid or disaster diplomacy if its own domestic financial house was flowing efficiently.
Absolutely.
If the state had access to its own capital, it could fund its own climate proofing and manufacture its own public health solutions. And that transitions us perfectly from physical roadblocks in Nuwara Eliya to bureaucratic gridlock in the financial institutions.
The transition from the physical mud of a landslide to the invisible quicksand of administrative backlog.
Quicksand is right. The numbers we are looking at are staggering. As I mentioned at the top of this deep dive, there is currently Rs. 108 billion in disputed tax revenue. That money is trapped, sitting in an unresolved massive backlog at the Tax Appeals Commission.
And that's just one part of the problem.
Right. And while that astronomical sum is paralyzed, a deputy minister has just gone on record stating that a U.S. $2.5 million theft at the central bank could have been prevented with simply greater vigilance.
Greater vigilance.
Such is incredible.
I know. At the same time, the Inland Revenue Department, the IRD, is completely stalled on a tax dispute involving national cricketers because they are actively seeking clarification from the Court of Appeal before they can even make a ruling.
It's gridlock everywhere.
Everywhere. And the friction isn't just in the accounting departments, it is boiling over in the parliamentary oversight committees. The Committee on Public Finance, COPF, saw its chairman, Harsha De Silva, reportedly pressured by ruling party members not to include the word fraud in a recent report.
That's a highly loaded word.
Very. And over at the Committee on Public Enterprises, COPE, 2 Construction Industry Development Authority directors were forced to publicly apologize for indecent conduct during official proceedings. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at the anatomy of this institutional paralysis. Let's unpack the Rs, 108 billion at the Tax Appeals Commission. This isn't an accident. It is the result of a legal filibuster.
Wait, a legal filibuster. Explain the mechanics of that. Because to the average person, if the tax authority says you owe money, you just have to pay it or your assets are seized, right? How does 108 billion rupees just sit there?
Because corporate tax law operates in a completely different universe than individual income tax. The Tax Appeals Commission is a quasi-judicial body. When a massive corporation is handed a massive tax assessment by the Inland Revenue Department, their legal teams don't just write a check.
No, they call their lawyers.
Exactly. They look at the time value of money. If a company owes, say, 2 billion rupees, locking that dispute up in the appeals process for 5, 6, or 7 years means they can keep that capital liquid. They can invest it, generate returns, and essentially use the appeals process as a zero-interest loan from the government, while the underfunded bureaucracy just grinds away at the paperwork.
Oh, wow. So they are actively incentivized to drag it out.
Completely. The system, relying on manual auditing and prolonged tribunal hearings, is structurally designed in a way that rewards delay tactics. The backlog of Rs. 108 billion is a mathematical certainty when the appeals process is cheaper than just paying the tax bill itself.
That is infuriating, but it makes complete economic sense from the corporation's perspective, I guess. They are just playing the game by the rules the system provides. Contrast that highly sophisticated bureaucratic trapping of 108 billion rupees with the US $2.5 million theft at the central bank.
Right, the greater vigilance comment.
A deputy minister claims it could have been prevented with greater vigilance. It is such a jarring juxtaposition. On one hand, you have brilliant lawyers legally withholding billions through paperwork, and on the other end, you have millions allegedly just walking out the door of the central financial institution because someone wasn't paying close enough attention.
It speaks to a systemic vulnerability across all levels of the financial architecture. When basic vigilance fails at the central bank level, it erodes the foundational trust in the entire economic system. And we see this friction extending to the IRD and the national cricketers, too.
Oh, right, the cricketers. Why is that stalled?
Well, the taxation of elite athletes is notoriously complex. You're dealing with domestic salaries, foreign league earnings, international endorsement deals, and really complex residency rules. The fact that the IRD has to escalate this to the Court of Appeal for clarification suggests that the existing tax codes are entirely unequipped to handle modern, globalized revenue streams. The legislation simply hasn't kept pace with reality.
And when legislation fails to keep pace, the resulting friction usually ends up in the parliamentary oversight committees, which sounds like an absolute powder keg right now. We have to look at the COPF and COPE incidents very objectively here. Obviously, we are not here to endorse any political party's narrative, but we need to analyze the mechanics of these disputes.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have Harsha De Silva, the COPF chairman, reportedly facing intense pressure from ruling party members to strike the word fraud from a report. Why is that specific word the battleground? I mean, why not use mismanagement or irregularity?
Because in the realm of public finance, vocabulary is legal destiny. Words like mismanagement or administrative irregularity imply incompetence, which is politically embarrassing but rarely criminal.
Ah, I see.
The word fraud, however, establishes intentional deceit for financial gain. It carries specific legal weight and can trigger automatic criminal investigations by independent commissions. If a parliamentary committee officially publishes a report classifying an action as fraud, it essentially forces the hand of law enforcement. The intense push and pull over that single word is literally a fight over whether an issue remains a political talking point or becomes a criminal indictment.
Which perfectly explains the tension. And the fact that two cited directors had to apologize for indecent conduct at COPE just adds to this atmosphere of institutional chaos. These committees are designed to be the ultimate watchdogs, right? The apex predators of public accountability.
Right.
When the proceedings devolve into disciplinary apologies and fights over single vocabulary words, it sounds like the watchdog is spending all its energy fighting its own leash rather than guarding the house.
That is a really apt metaphor. It is the sound of an accountability mechanism struggling to assert its operational authority amidst intense political pressure.
And that struggle for authority transitions us from the financial oversight committees directly into the criminal justice system. Financial accountability isn't the only arena experiencing a massive stress test right now. The judicial system is currently in absolute overdrive, processing a wave of high-profile political figures.
Yeah, the friction is moving from the halls of Parliament straight to the docks of the courtroom.
So let's run through the docket, because the sheer volume is unprecedented. Former Education Minister and former UNP General Secretary Akila Viraj Kuriawasam has been arrested by CIA Bureau, that's the Commission to Investigate Allegations of Bribery or Corruption.
Right.
He has been remanded until August 18 over a corruption case involving an alleged Rs. 2.76 million loss to the state. Meanwhile, Shashindra Rajapaksa's Rs. 8.8 million compensation case is making its return to the Colombo High Court. We are also seeing a massive contempt case naming a slew of high-profile figures, including Wimal Weerawansa, Udaya Gamanpila, Dilith Jayawira, Sujawara Bandara, Asanka Navaratne, and Mahinda Pathirana.
That's a long list.
And it doesn't stop there. In a completely separate but incredibly tense clash, the SLPP has formally rejected claims that its General Secretary, Sagara Kuriawasam, threatened the IGP, Ananda Wijapala. In response to the growing narrative, the Public Security Minister actually had to step in and publicly assert that the police crackdown will continue regardless of any threats.
The intersection of politics and the penal code is always volatile, but what we are witnessing right now is a simultaneous activation of multiple legal levers against very powerful individuals.
So, what does this all mean? I want to push back on the scale of this for a moment. We just spent 10 minutes talking about a legal loophole trapping 108 billion rupees in tax revenue. And now, CIPOC is arresting a former cabinet minister, Akila Viraj Karyawasam, over an alleged loss of 2.76 million rupees.
Right, the numbers seem mismatched.
In the grand scheme of national finance, 2.76 million is a rounding error. Why is the Anti-Corruption Commission deploying its resources on an amount that small, while billions sit in administrative purgatory? Are these legal actions a sign of a cleansing system or the politicization of the judiciary? You have to wonder.
It is a vital question, and it really comes down to the difference between systemic exploitation and granular criminality. The $108 billion at the Tax Appeals Commission is, ostensibly, a legal dispute operating within the bounds of a flawed system. CIPOC, however, does not deal in systemic inefficiencies. They deal in specific demonstrable acts of corruption.
Okay, so it's about proving the specific act.
Exactly. Investigating a former minister over a highly specific sum like ours, 2.76 million, requires a granular forensic level of evidence, tracing specific authorizations, specific procurement orders, and specific financial transfers. When an anti-corruption commission pursues a case like this, they aren't looking at the macroeconomic impact. They're looking at establishing a legal precedent.
It's about sending a message.
Yes. It signals that institutional muscle is being flexed, proving that even a former general secretary of a major party can be subjected to the minutiae of the penal code.
It's about establishing the baseline of the rule of law. And you see that baseline being tested in this massive contempt of court case naming figures like Wimal Weerawansa and Udaya Gamanpila. Contempt of court is such a fascinating legal concept when applied to politicians, isn't it? It isn't about stealing money, it's about a lack of respect for the institution itself.
Precisely. Contempt of court in a highly charged political environment is rarely about a disruption in the courtroom itself, like someone yelling at a judge. It is usually about public statements or actions that undermine the authority, integrity, or independence of the judiciary in the eyes of the public.
Right. Happening in the media.
Yeah. When political figures who command massive media platforms are named in a contempt case, it is the judiciary drawing a hard line in the sand, defending its own institutional legitimacy from political rhetoric.
And that defense of institutional legitimacy is exactly what we are seeing play out between the SLPP and the police force. The SLPP formally denying that Sagara Karyawasam threatened the IGP, followed by the public security minister having to publicly state that the police crackdown will continue, is a massive stress test of operational independence.
It is a classic historical tension of any democracy. You have a political establishment accustomed to wielding broad influence and shaping narratives, coming face-to-face with a law enforcement agency attempting to assert strict, uncompromising operational boundaries.
It's a collision course.
It is. When a cabinet minister has to utilize a public press conference to reassure the nation that the police will not be deterred by political threats, it tells you exactly how much invisible pressure is being applied behind the scenes. It is a stress test of the firewall that is supposed to separate political will from police action.
And while the politicians are facing the courts and the police are defending their operational firewall, the legal fraternity itself, the very people who operate the machinery of justice, is facing intense internal and external pressures. The battles aren't just contained in the courtroom anymore, they are spilling out into broader societal debates.
Yeah, the lawyers, the judges, and the lawmakers are finding themselves as the subjects of the news rather than just the facilitators of it.
Let's look at how active the Bar Association of Sri Lanka, the BASL, is right now. The BASL president, Rajav Amarasuriya, is currently facing a barrage of baseless personal attacks on Facebook. The BSL as an institution recently had to formally step in and distance itself from opposition leader Sajith Premadasa's parliamentary invitation.
They're trying to stay out of the political crossfire.
Exactly. And furthermore, they're actively seeking a meeting with the president over a massively debated amendment that would extend the retirement age of Superior Court judges. This policy is generating intense heat, with some opinion pieces comparing its implementation to a Gotaba-style move.
That's a heavy comparison.
Very heavy. And it isn't just the structure of the courts causing societal debate, it's the actual legislation. Take the Animal Welfare Bill. The Animal Welfare Coalition just had to launch a massive public relations effort to debunk fake claims that the bill bans the chaining of elephants or completely outlaws their use in cultural processions.
The misinformation spreads so fast.
It does. Meanwhile, you have the UNP officially claiming that the bill undermines the entire Parahera tradition. And amidst all this legal, administrative, and cultural chaos, the Supreme Court has rejected a bid to postpone the AL exams, forcing the educational timeline to remain strict, while top AL students recently received laptops to help them navigate this increasingly complex modern landscape.
This raises an important question, particularly regarding the BA cell and the judiciary. Why is the retirement age of Superior Court judges triggering such a massive, vitriolic societal debate? I mean, to a casual observer, extending a retirement age from 60 to 65 or 63 to 65 seems like an obscure administrative human resources detail, right? Why the outrage?
Well, I would assume it has everything to do with the freezing of ideological power. I look at this and I don't see a debate about pensions or working years. I see a debate about controlling the bench. If you extend the retirement age of the current crop of Superior Court judges, you are essentially hitting the pause button on the judicial appointment process, correct?
Your assumption is entirely accurate. In a highly charged transitional political environment, the tenure of a Superior Court judge is deeply tied to the balance of national power.
Because they make the final call.
Right. Judges interpret the constitutionality of new laws, they rule on election disputes, and as we just saw, they handle high-profile contempt cases. If an administration extends the retirement age, they are effectively locking in the current ideological or philosophical makeup of the court for several more years.
Oh, wow. So no new appointments.
Exactly. They are preventing new vacancies from opening up, which denies future administrations the opportunity to appoint their own preferred jurists. The BAL recognizes the profound geopolitical implications of this quote-unquote administrative detail. By fighting the judicial retirement age extension, and by very publicly distancing themselves from political invitations like the one from the opposition leader, the BAL is fiercely guarding the optics and the reality of absolute judicial independence.
And the blowback for guarding that independence is severe. The personal attacks on DASL President Rajeev Amarasuriya on Facebook are a perfect example of the modern weaponization of social media against legal professionals. You take a firm institutional stance, and suddenly you are subjected to coordinated, baseless digital harassment.
It's the new reality of public office, unfortunately.
It is. The optics are everything, and you see how easily optics can be manipulated by disinformation when you look at the Animal Welfare Bill.
The Animal Welfare Bill is a masterclass in how legislation becomes a proxy war for broader cultural anxieties.
It really is fascinating. It's like a massive societal tug of war where one side is pulling for ethical modernization and animal rights, and the other side is pulling to protect historical heritage. But because of the rampant misinformation, they are pulling on two completely different roads.
Yeah, they aren't even having the same argument.
Exactly. You have citizens genuinely believing that this bill will instantly end centuries-old cultural processions because they read a fake claim on social media that chaining elephants will be outlawed overnight. The Animal Welfare Coalition is screaming that this is fake news, but the UNP is capitalizing on the anxiety by claiming the bill undermines the Parahera tradition.
This is exactly what happens when a society is undergoing rapid compounding stress. We've spent this deep dive talking about massive tax burdens, political arrests, and climate disasters. When the foundational elements of a society feel unstable, people grip onto their cultural heritage with an iron fist.
Right, it's a defense mechanism.
Exactly. Any perceived threat to a deep-rooted tradition like the Parahera, even if that threat is entirely fabricated by fake news, triggers a massive, disproportionate defensive response. The debate stops being about the specifics of the Animal Welfare Bill, the actual legal text regarding the treatment of animals, and becomes entirely about a perceived attack on national identity.
And amidst all of this noise, the Supreme Court steps in and rejects the bid to postpone the AL exams. It feels almost incredibly grounding. Despite the political arrests, the cultural proxy wars, and the financial gridlock, the highest court in the land is essentially saying, no, the educational timeline will not bend to the chaos. The exams will proceed.
It's a stabilizing force.
Yeah, and supplying those top students with laptops is a nod to the fact that they are inheriting an incredibly complex, digitized world. And as Sri Lanka wrestles with its internal legal and cultural identity, its economic borders are rapidly evolving, forcing a reconnection with the global marketplace.
We are moving from the internal friction of cultural debates to the external realities of geopolitical economics.
And the moves on the geopolitical chessboard right now are massive. Indian Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri just concluded a highly significant visit to Sri Lanka, meeting directly with President Anura Kumara Dissanayake, AKD, the key outcomes from this high-level diplomatic summit. A mutual agreement to aggressively advance the India-Sri Lanka Free Trade Agreement, the FTA, and the unlocking of a substantial USD 350 million Indian credit facility.
That's a major injection of credit.
Major. Now, while those sophisticated high-level handshakes are happening in the capital, out on the turbulent waters of the Palk Strait, the Sri Lankan Navy had to launch a complex rescue operation for a poaching Indian trawler that ran aground.
Quite the contrast.
Very much so. Looking inward at the domestic economy, the local auto industry is telegraphing a massive paradigm shift. They are moving away from the traditional model of importing finished vehicles and transitioning into an assembly mode. To track this monumental shift, the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, the CCC, has just revived its motor vehicle industry report after a full 6-year hiatus.
6 years is a long time for an industry to go dark.
It is, and across other sectors, the metrics are showing life. Tourism has officially welcomed over 1.3 million international tourists in 2026. Global indices show Sri Lanka is among the fastest improvers in investor relations and debt transparency rankings. The Sri Lankan passport is currently ranked 94th in the world, and Minister Handanetti has explicitly stated that the entire future of the domestic textile industry relies on rapid innovation and tech integration.
It is a remarkable, multifaceted picture of an economy desperately trying to pivot from a state of contraction to a state of integrated value-added production.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If we look at the auto industry shifting to an assembly mode, and we place that data point right next to the advancing free trade agreement with India, you have to connect the dots. You don't just assemble cars out of thin air.
Definitely not.
You don't conjure an auto industry from nothing. Assembly requires CKD kits, completely knockdown vehicle kits. It requires a massive influx of raw materials, and it requires deeply integrated logistics. If Sri Lanka is positioning itself as a localized assembly hub, how does a massive, heavily industrialized neighbor like India factor into that supply chain?
You have hit on the exact strategic calculus driving these diplomatic meetings. This is where we have to deeply examine the dichotomy of India-Sri Lanka relations.
Right.
At the macro level, in the boardrooms and presidential offices, you have these highly sophisticated FTA negotiations and a $350 million credit line. This is India securing its economic footprint and stabilizing its southern neighbor, which is entirely in its own strategic interest. If the Sri Lankan auto industry moves into vehicle assembly, India is the most logical, geographically viable supplier of the raw materials and prefabricated parts. An advanced FTA would streamline the tariffs on those specific industrial imports, creating an integrated regional supply chain where Indian manufacturing feeds Sri Lankan assembly lines.
Oh, let me interrupt, because that macro-level synergy completely ignores the micro-level friction. While they are signing FTAs in Colombo, the Sri Lankan Navy is pulling a grounded, poaching Indian trawler off a reef. It is such a stark contrast. You have billions of dollars in credit lines flowing one way and illegal fishing vessels encroaching the other way, stripping marine resources.
It is a perfect encapsulation of the relationship. It is fraught with localized ground-level resource conflict, but ultimately bound by a macroeconomic necessity to cooperate. The fact that the Sri Lankan Navy launched a humanitarian rescue for a poaching vessel rather than engaging in a hostile interdiction shows a calculated restraint.
Right, they didn't escalate it.
Exactly. It is an understanding that the macro relationship, the $350 million credit, the FPA, is too important to jeopardize over the ongoing micro conflicts in the Palk Strait.
It requires an incredibly delicate diplomatic balancing act. And speaking of waking up to new realities, the fact that the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce brought back their motor vehicle industry report after 6 full years of silence is incredibly telling.
It signals a market waking up from a long, policy-induced hibernation. For years, due to severe import bans designed to desperately save foreign exchange reserves, the auto industry was essentially frozen. Dealerships were empty, the industry was paralyzed.
People literally couldn't buy cars.
Right. By shifting to an assembly model, The industry is being forced into a massive evolution. They're no longer just acting as middlemen for foreign consumption. They're being forced to create local value addition. They have to build assembly plants, train a technical workforce, and manage complex industrial supply chains.
It's a huge undertaking.
It is a forced modernization, much like what Minister Handanetti is demanding of the textile industry. You cannot rely on cheap labor as your only competitive advantage anymore. You have to integrate technology to survive in the global market.
But when we talk about integrating technology on a global scale, the definition of innovation is moving so exponentially fast that it is about to rewrite the entire economic rulebook. We aren't just talking about upgrading to better sewing machines in garment factories or building more efficient car assembly lines. We are talking about fundamental, terrifying paradigm shifts in how human civilization operates.
We are entering an era where human labor, human thought, and even human physical presence are being augmented, weaponized, and in many sectors, entirely replaced.
Which brings us to the global tech arena and the rapidly shifting paradigms that govern it. Let's start with a massive projection. A new World Bank Group 2026 report states that artificial intelligence could fundamentally transform developing economies in just 10 years.
10 years is nothing in economic terms.
It's basically tomorrow, and we are seeing this locally, with feature articles noting that Sri Lankans are increasingly turning to AI applications for answers to their daily professional and personal problems. Meanwhile, beyond our atmosphere, human technology is literally leaving a scar. A wayward 4-ton SpaceX rocket stage just collided with the moon, completely unregulated.
Unbelievable.
Back on Earth, the intersection of technology and political power is producing wild results. Pakistan has just restricted international media reporting, attempting a massive crackdown on the information flow. Right next door in India, Prashant Kishore, the famed election strategist who utilizes massive data analytics and tech-driven voter profiling, made a stellar electoral debut, winning the Bankipur stronghold.
The power of data.
Yeah, and then we have the tragedies, the very dark, visceral side of our hyper-connected world. A Mexican influencer, Cesar Gastelum, was shot dead while literally live streaming on TikTok.
That is just horrifying.
It's dystopian. In Europe, the democratization of aviation technology took a dark turn when a drone carrying explosives was found at a German airport. And in a bizarre display of pop culture tech wealth, original Game of Thrones dragon eggs are heading to auction for astronomical sums.
It is an absolute whiplash of human achievement, regulatory failure, and raw human vulnerability.
I want to focus heavily on that World Bank report because a headline that says AI will transform developing economies in 10 years sounds incredibly utopian. It sounds like a magic wand. But I have to push back on this narrative. Does artificial intelligence actually level the playing field for a developing economy like Sri Lanka, allowing us to leapfrog legacy infrastructure? Or does it just build a much taller, infinitely more expensive fence around the developed nations, the nations who actually own the massive server farms, hold the patents for the neural networks, and control the proprietary algorithms?
That is the defining macroeconomic and geopolitical question of this decade. The World Bank suggests that AI can help optimize chaotic agricultural supply chains, revolutionize telemedicine in rural areas that lack doctors, and streamline bloated government services.
Which, if we refer back to our R's 108 billion tax backlog, sounds like an absolute miracle cure.
Oh, absolutely. But your skepticism is entirely justified. The bottleneck of the AI revolution is compute power. It requires massive data centers, specialized microchips, and enormous energy grids. If a developing nation is simply licensing and renting the AI models built by a handful of tech monopolies in Silicon Valley, they are not leapfrogging anything.
Right, they're just paying rent.
Exactly. They are just swapping one form of economic dependency for a more advanced, deeply entrenched digital colonialism. You are entirely dependent on an algorithm you do not own, running on a server you cannot access, governed by terms of service you cannot dictate.
Exactly. And furthermore, we have to synthesize this utopian economic vision with the darker realities of modern tech we just outlined.
The live-streamed murder and the weaponized drone.
Yes. We are talking about how AI might streamline our tax system, while simultaneously consumer technology is outpacing basic human safety and global regulation. We have commercial consumer drones, which you can buy online for a few $100s, being weaponized with high explosives and deployed at a major German airport.
Anyone can buy them.
Right. We have social media algorithms, which are essentially primitive AI prioritizing live engagement so aggressively that a man's actual murder is broadcast in real time on TikTok, generating engagement metrics while a human life ends. And we have private corporations like SpaceX leaving 4-ton pieces of space junk to crash into the lunar surface because orbital regulation is based on treaties written in the 1960s. The regulation is non-existent.
When you contrast this chaotic, borderless, unregulated technological frontier with something like Pakistan restricting international media reporting, you see the massive friction of our era.
Yeah.
Governments are panicking.
They don't know what to do.
They are trying to use blunt 20th century tools like localized media bans and censorship edicts to control a 21st century decentralized information ecosystem. It is an exercise in futility. It highlights regional volatility and press freedoms, and it sharply contrasts with the more sophisticated, data-driven political strategies we see elsewhere. Look at Prashant Kishore winning in India. He didn't win by banning media. He won by mastering the data ecosystem, using tech analytics to micro-target demographics.
It really is like trying to contain a flood with a chain-link fence. The technology, whether it's AI, drones, or data analytics, is just moving too exponentially fast for traditional governance to catch up. And it creates these bizarre societal distortions, like millions of people watching a tragedy on TikTok while billionaires bid on Game of Thrones dragon eggs. It is a surreal landscape.
It's deeply surreal.
And from these incredibly high-stakes, unregulated arenas of global tech and shifting political power, we move to a different kind of high-stakes arena. An arena where the drama, the physical conflict, and the triumph are supposed to stay neatly contained within the boundaries of the pitch. But as we see time and time again, the friction and the mechanics of the real world always bleed into the wide world of sports.
Because sports governance is rarely just about the rules of the game. It is almost always a reflection of the economic and political society that plays it.
Absolutely. Let's start with a moment of incredible, localized glory. In athletics, Sri Lanka's Rumesh Thuranga has just climbed to world #1 in the men's javelin throw. This historical ranking follows an absolutely monstrous 89.75-meter gold medal throw at the 2026 Commonwealth Games in Glasgow.
Just an incredible achievement.
Amazing. At the same time, we saw a changing of the guard, as Yupun Abikun, the fastest man in South Asia, brought the curtain down on his incredible career on July 21. Over in international cricket, Ben Stokes is making massive headlines, stating his ambition to eventually coach England.
That'll be interesting.
Yeah, and the Sri Lanka women's cricket team made a huge statement by defeating Pakistan by 6 wickets. The Dialogue Sri Lanka Cricket Awards 2025 were officially announced, and in a highly notable move, the president met directly with the SLC Transformation Committee.
So we have a blend of individual athletic milestones colliding with high-level national governance restructuring.
But the governance restructuring on the global stage isn't always smooth. In fact, it is currently explosive. Let's look at global football. FIFA President Gianni Infantino was forced to publicly apologize for massive errors in his highly controversial, secretive plans to sell off stakes in FIFA competitions to private investors.
It's a huge scandal.
Huge. But despite the apology and the outrage, he remains in power. In direct response to this monopolistic behavior, UEFA has threatened the ultimate nuclear option. They are threatening to boycott World Cups entirely if FIFA's privatization plans are approved.
A World Cup without Europe.
Exactly. Locally, in football governance, FFSL President Joswar Umar was just elected as SAF Vice President. In the hyper-capitalist world of football transfers, Liverpool icon Mo Salah seemingly confirmed a massive, lucrative transfer by being spotted publicly in a Trabzonspor shirt. And then, a reminder of the raw vulnerability of life on the pitch, a tragic lightning strike during a match in Thailand killed a footballer and injured 12 others in an instant. Finally, in motorsport logistics, Malaysia's Sepang circuit is stepping in to save the calendar, hosting the rescheduled F1 Bahrain Grand Prix.
The overarching contrast here between the pure individuals achieving physical greatness and the massive institutions viciously fighting for financial control is stark.
It really is. I want to look closely at that FIFA and UEFA civil war over selling competition stakes. I look at that situation and I don't see sports governance. I see the exact mechanics of a corporate hostile takeover. The actual sport, the players sweating on the pitch, the fans buying the tickets, they're just the raw product, the commodity.
Right, the game is just the product.
The boardroom is where the real contact sport is happening. UEFA threatening to boycott the World Cup is essentially threatening to bankrupt the parent company.
It is the ultimate weaponization of a sport's cultural and economic value. When you analyze the contrast in sports leadership globally versus locally, it is fascinating. At the highest global level, you have Infantino clinging to absolute power, attempting to unilaterally privatize global assets, despite admitting massive structural errors and facing a UEFA boycott threat that could literally fracture the sport of football into two separate universes.
It's a complete mess.
And then, juxtapose that monopolistic hoarding of power with the localized governance shifts we see in Sri Lanka, where the president is meeting directly with the SLC Transformation Committee. In that instance, the local institution, after years of friction, is being forced by the state to open up, to restructure, and to attempt to rebuild trust and efficacy in the national game.
And amidst all that boardroom chaos, all the billion-dollar transfer rumors of Mo Salah and the institutional friction, you have the pure, unadulterated achievement of the athletes themselves operating outside the boardroom. I want you, the listener, to really reflect on the mechanics of Ramesh Thuranga's massive 89.75-meter throw. Think about what it takes for an athlete from a developing nation to achieve that.
It's mind-blowing when you really think about it.
We have spent an hour talking about economic bottlenecks, our 108 billion trapped in bureaucracy, lack of infrastructure, and political chaos. For an athlete to overcome those intense local hurdles, to find the facilities to train, to maintain the psychological focus amidst national economic stress, and to launch a javelin 89.75 meters to reach world number one, it defies the statistical odds. It is staggering.
It is a profound testament to human resilience and biomechanical perfection. We talked earlier about a nation navigating heavy economic, legal, and political stress tests. When Ramesh Thuranga wins gold in Glasgow, or when the Sri Lanka women's cricket team decisively defeats Pakistan, these aren't just entries in a sporting almanac.
No, they mean so much more.
They function as vital, emotional release valves for the entire nation. They provide a unifying, undeniable narrative of success that cuts straight through the political polarization, the economic anxiety, and the cultural proxy wars we've analyzed today.
Which brings this massive journey full circle. What an incredible, expansive deep dive we've been on today. We started in the literal mud, examining the localized devastation of a landslide blocking a vital economic artery, and the macroeconomic realities of climate triage and disaster diplomacy.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We moved into the abstract, deeply frustrating world of legal filibusters, watching billions of rupees locked in tax disputes while oversight committees battled over the legal definition of fraud. We watched the legal fraternity fiercely guard its independence from political influence, while society engaged in a proxy war over cultural heritage and animal welfare legislation.
The tug of war.
Exactly. We traced the complex supply chains of transitioning vehicle assembly lines all the way to high-level diplomatic credit agreements with India. We stared into the hyper-accelerated, unregulated future of AI economics, weaponized consumer drones, and rockets crashing into the lunar surface. And finally, we watched a javelin soar 89.75 meters through the air to claim the absolute #1 spot in the world, reminding us of the human element amidst the systemic chaos.
The persistent through line today is human adaptation. It is how we build our infrastructure, how we argue our laws, how we invent our tools, and how we play our games. But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over, connecting two seemingly disparate threads from today's deep dive.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have spent an hour talking about human politicians hiding behind vocabulary and oversight reports, human judges fiercely debating their retirement age to preserve ideological balance, and human error, a simple lack of basic vigilance, allegedly causing a $2.5 million central bank theft. Now, bring back that World Bank prediction. Artificial intelligence will transform our economies in 10 years.
Yeah.
If humans are this prone to error, bias, corruption, and institutional friction, will we soon decide to voluntarily outsource our governance, our complex tax auditing, and our justice system entirely to algorithms? And if we surrender that control in the name of efficiency, who exactly will we hold in contempt of court when the machine inevitably gets it wrong?
Wow. That is a terrifying, brilliant, and deeply necessary question. We always want our societal problems to be visible, categorized, and easily fixable, much like a broken arm in an X-ray. But as we've seen throughout this deep dive, the architecture of our world is murky, deeply interconnected, and constantly shifting. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning the mechanics behind the headlines, and we will see you next time.